Welcome to an episode of the award-winning podcast Art Insiders New York. My name is Anders Holst. The theme of the podcast is New York, with a focus on behind-the-scenes conversations with fascinating people who are making an impact in the world of art, design, and architecture. Emma Enderby is the chief curator at The Shed at Hudson Yards, a unique art institution with a bold vision of and for the century we are in. In this fascinating interview, Emma talks passionately about the guiding principles that help building the program. We discuss what makes good art, her personal taste in art, as well as books and artists that inspire her. Among them, Agnes Denes and Hilma of Klint. Commissions are at the heart of the Shed's mission. One prime example being the annual Open Call, which opens on June 4th this year. Open Call is a series of exhibitions and events aimed at providing invaluable support, visibility, and recognition to New York's early career artists working across all forms and media. The Shed's remarkably innovative design is at the core of its support of artists' visions and the work they create, all under one roof. Or, in this case, no roof is an option. So Emma, very welcome to the show. You are the chief curator at The Shed in New York.
Yes, I am. Hi, thank you for having me.
You're very welcome. I looked into your background and I saw that you used to be the associate curator at the Public Art Fund in New York. You also were the exhibitions curator at the Serpentine Gallery in London. And before that, you were working on exhibitions at the Royal Academy of Arts and the Whitechapel Gallery, and also worked with public programs at the National Portrait Gallery in London and the Museum of Modern Art. So I thought to myself, you really started at the top and then you work yourself up.
I worked at a lot of brilliant institutions, but it's definitely been a stepping stone each time. You kind of start as an intern and then slowly work your way up that kind of curatorial ladder. So yes, I've been very privileged to work at all these brilliant institutions that have taught me so much. But it has been, it's been a journey as well for me.
You also are a writer and a lecturer, and I've understood that your writing is related to the exhibitions that you've organized. If you would get a book deal to write a book about something, what would you write about?
That's a really interesting question. I've thought about this a few times. I'm writing right now a text that I would love to expand on, maybe turn into a show or turn into a larger book, which is the intersection of science fiction and art. I think that it's really grown we do see it grown through the 21st century and into the 21st century because it's so kind of attached to our climate emergency, the uncertainties of the way technology plays in our world and our life, what is consciousness now, what is humanity, and I see it playing out more and more in artists' work. And I'm just writing this text, but that would be, I think, something that would be really interesting to expand on. Another idea that I would love to explore is environmental formalism, actually, how artists are also thinking about our climate emergency, but sometimes through form rather than something kind of direct, through more kind of minimalist terms or conceptual terms. So that's another area that would be of interest to me to write about. But we shall see if I ever craft out the time to write a book.
Yeah. So would that be then fiction rather than, like a documentary-oriented thing?
No, it would, unfortunately, no. One day I'd love to write fiction, but I'm not there yet. It would definitely be rooted in thinking about artists' practice that draw on the traditions, say, of science fiction to talk about what it means to live now and into the future. So it would be very much rooted in artist practice through the specific lens, yeah.
So I was curious about your last name there, Enderby. I'm from Sweden. That could be a Swedish name. By is like a village in Sweden. So Enderby could be Emma from Ender, the village of Ender. Have you researched your name?
That is the kind of common mythology of the name, that the family, we are from Sweden, Scandinavia originally. That is true. So my family, my Enderby side is from my father's side, is from the north of England, and that is the the lore, if you will, of the Enderby family, that they came originally from that part of the world. And some of them became farmers in the north, and others actually became whalers, interestingly enough, in London. There's a few Enderby dwarfs and alleyways and such named in London. So they went kind of two different directions. But yes, that is the story. And even you can see in the kind of old black and white photographs of my family, these like crazy blue eyes that like pierce through the photograph.
So there's some Viking blood there, if you look closely.
We'll see. Yeah, who knows? But that's somehow the story.
You are the chief curator. Now, can I ask you, what does a curator do?
A curator does many different things, and depending on also what institution you're at. So, at the Shed, my role as a curator and as the chief curator is to really oversee the whole visual art department. And that is both my curatorial colleagues, but also exhibition management. And, the role entails a lot of research, studio visits, thinking about what are kind of contemporary conversations when you're a contemporary curator like I am that are happening today, and how can you weave all those conversations together and bring kind of look for patterns sometimes within the way that artists are working and thinking. Mm-hmm. And then that's kind of the research side. And of course, we write texts and make books and all those types of things. But then there's also a whole suite of kind of practical things that you do as a curator, especially when you're commissioning like we do at the Shed, which means really making new work. So that is, everything from helping artists think through materials to connecting them with fabricators, working with them to plan an installation. Mm-hmm. It's kind of hugely varied. And then, of course, there's all of the marketing communications. The curatorial team works very heavily in that regard on kind of really contextualizing the work, writing text about the work, really positioning it for audiences, essentially, and making sure that work can be accessible in that way as well. So it's a very varied job. People sometimes think it's glamorous. I'm like, not, like the glamour part, maybe like 3%. The rest of it, last week we were all packing boxes. You do like lots of different things in the role as a curator.
Yeah, there is sort of a deep sense of purpose in your work that sort of is glamorous in its own, right? I mean, there's like it's important work that you do.
For me, it is important. I think that artists can tell us realities of our time, stories from the past, can predict the future. So important in helping us understand our reality in the moment that we're in. Mm-hmm. It can be oracles in that way. And I think it's so important to help them, to commission artists to make that work. I just think back to why I became interested in the first place in art history. And it was, I actually started as a classicist and then started being more interested in how you could think about history through objects and architecture rather than through language necessarily. And then kind of became more of a social art historian. But I think about it all the time, about how art is also going to be a message for the future in understanding what this moment was, like it is for us from the past. So I do think that there is that it is an important role for society. Yeah.
Yeah, I saw in one article here that the interviewer was asking you about curating as a creative act, and that curator, in a sense, they are artists as well. Do you see yourself as an artist?
It's interesting you ask that. I don't necessarily, no, I don't see myself as an artist. I definitely see myself more as a bridge or a facilitator between an artist and an audience. That's definitely how I kind of understand and see my role. And, it's interesting because the word curator, it comes from to care, but it was to care for objects, to preserve things. And I think that for me has definitely expanded outside of it just being about the object, but being about people. Like, how do you care for the artist? How do you care for your audiences, for community and society? And I think that there is so much creativity within that. And I think that the role is incredibly creative without necessarily wanting to term myself an artist per se.
Yeah. Have you ever thought about becoming an artist at some point in your life?
No, I have. I've literally never thought about becoming an artist. No, I'm not. I live and breathe art, but I'm not an artist myself, no.
How do you, together with Alex Potts and Hans Ulrich Obrist, how do you decide, okay, guys, this is what we're going to do, not that, this is what we're going to do? How does that process work?
Yeah, so we have a programming team, which is myself, Hans Ulrich, Alex, Tamira McCaw, Madeline Johannes, and we all come from very different perspectives, focused on different areas, and it comes from an incredible amount of conversation. You know, for me, I have a few, just speaking personally, a few kind of guiding stars in thinking about what should enter our program. You know, we have this privilege at the Shed where we get to commission artists, and that's an amazing thing to be able to do, is to offer artists the opportunity to really make new work. And so one of those guiding kind of stars and principles for me are thinking, you know, what are the artists that haven't necessarily traditionally got those commissions, those opportunities. So we do have kind of a part of our program is rethinking the canon or representing artists that have historically been marginalized. You know, emerging artists as well are another kind of core part of our programs. Mm-hmm. You know, you see that in Open Call. And then I think the other really side of the program that we talk a lot about is how do we also be a place that can center kind of urgent issues of our time, of the past as well, because many of them have been going on for a long time, but things like the center on climate change or on, you know, technology's role within society, all these things, racial injustice, all these things weave in to our program at the Shed. So those are kind of the guiding principles that we have in trying to build this program in our building.
That you mentioned in an interview, you said, I've thought so much about space and landscape this last year, about our bodily relationship to nature and place, as well as the proximity and distance. So when you look back at your thinking, if I can say so, how has it evolved over time?
I think everything kind of folds in and comes out of different moments. But there are definitely themes, obviously, humanity's relationship to nature, how we can somehow maybe re-embed ourselves in the world, in the landscape. You know, we've kind of, since the Enlightenment, like removed ourselves in a way from thinking that humans are of nature, and that separation has caused, specifically in the Western world, you know, it's been such a detriment to our society. So that is something that I've been thinking about for a long time. But I think that really only, I'd say, in the last few years that I've been really articulating that in my exhibition practice, my exhibition making practice.
Yeah.
You see these kind of threads from being, you know, working with Spencer Finch to plant 4,000 trees for a project with Public Art Fund, to, you know, learning about Agnes Denes at Public Art Fund and then mounting her retrospective, you know, at the Shed. So there are these lines that you can see that run through, but perhaps not so kind of prescriptive. Yeah.
You see, this podcast is about New York, and this caught my interest. You mentioned N.K. Jemisin's new book, The City We Became. It's about New York. Now, can you tell us about the book and why it caught your interest?
Yeah, absolutely. I don't know if she's this brilliant eco-sci-fi writer. I don't know if you're familiar with her work, but I read a trilogy of hers, which was, to me, completely mind-blowing. I mean, she just knows exactly how to create a world that lets you kind of really, really delve into that. And then this book was super, I live in New York, and especially during the pandemic, spent a lot of time walking in ways that I hadn't actually ever done before in the same way. And, you know, this book really looks about how New York has its kind of own soul. It is both ancient, but also based in the future. I'm someone who hates giving away too much about books, but it essentially is kind of a sci-fi understanding of New York City, and takes this city as the kind of starting point and follows these kind of different protagonists through the city.
Okay, so that's a recommendation to our listeners, really, to go out and get the trilogy and start reading.
You know, there's Earth threatened by a great evil. It it's quite brilliant to read it. I mean, it's also based in this kind of the uncertainty of where the future is going and where humanity is going and how humanity might have to adapt, right, to stay on this earth. So I definitely recommend it. She's an amazing writer.
I saw this interesting analysis that in New York you have the Metropolitan Museum, you have the Museum of Modern Art, and you have Lincoln Center, and now you have the Shed. That was a little bit how someone characterized this in the sense of its importance. And how would you describe the essence of the Shed, sort of the DNA of it? What are you trying to achieve here?
We opened in 2019. Part of our mission is to try be of and for this century that we're in. We want to bring both established and emerging artists together, but the range of work that we commission and work with is extremely varied. It is pop, classical music, but also like painting to digital media, sculpture, literature, theatre, dance. It's, you look through even just our short time of programming and it's incredibly, incredibly varied. And I think something else that is such a core part of our mission and vision is really reflected in the fact that the Shed is also a civic institution. It was a city initiative. The city kind of gave the first seed money to realizing it. And with that comes a civic responsibility, right, to ensure that New York communities, both artists and audience, have kind of access to cultural opportunities. So,
from hip hop to classic music, visual art to literature, film to theater and dance, under one roof. So let's talk about Open Call. So what is this?
So the program is really a cornerstone of the Shed's mission, and for us, it kind of reflects everything about our mission is embedded in this program. It's bringing in artists working across all disciplines, all the disciplines you just mentioned, plus more, everything in between within our program. And we provide a commissioning fee of up to $15,000 and support in realizing the work. And it is an open call. And that's super important because it is open. Anyone can apply. Any early career artist can apply, and we really clarify that by thinking through artists that haven't had major commissioning opportunities in the city. That's kind of the important crutch. Yeah. And we then kind of convene and work together with colleagues in the field to help us select these artists. And that's also a really important part of this program because, what it does, it decentralizes the curatorial voice, right? It says that it's not all Emma's decision. It's not all Alex's decision. It brings in these diverse perspectives into our curatorial process, which perhaps would get us to artists that maybe we wouldn't have otherwise. This year we launched the Open Call last year, and we had 1,500 proposals were submitted. Yeah, so I think it doubled from the first time we did it. So that was great to see. And then we had 43 reviewers looking through all of the applications, and then we convened a panel of about 15 of us, and that was last summer, where we whittled it down to the artist list that we're presenting this summer.
That's incredible.
There are so many things that go into commissioning. It's not just about having a great idea. It's like, can it be realized? Is it going to be within budget? Is it something that will be achieved within that amount of time? And so it's so important for us to have all that information to really be able to make a decision. But I also think it's great practice for artists, because once you're needing to think about what it means to put together a budget, think about what it means to put together these different elements, it really can help to clarify a project and clarify a proposal. And so I think that it is an important process for people to go to in really helping to kind of cement and develop ideas.
Yeah. then the process start of actually creating what you proposed. And that you do at the shed, and then you have sort of continuous support from your staff and organization. Is that correct?
Yes. So once we select, the artist begins the kind of making process. And we don't actually, for the visual art, we don't make at the shed. Most artists have their own studios, or sometimes they put that into their budget. Producing team of the shed then really work with them over the next, 8, 9, 10 months to every step of the way help to make sure that they're connected with the fabricators or thinking about the right questions, making sure that they're hitting their deadlines all along the way. And then in the performing arts side, similar, but we do have rehearsal space at the shed, can give our building over to artists wanting to rehearse in the building as well. But similar process of really working with them step by step to make sure that the work leaves the piece of paper and enters the world and can be presented.
Yeah. So what can we say about the 27 artists this time around?
Opening on June 4th is the gallery exhibition, and it's presented as a group show. And within that, you're going to see so many different mediums. I mean, we have, just to pick a couple, an augmented reality work by Caroline Garcia. There's multimedia installations by Kenneth Tam and Simon Liu and Anna Dozier. Painterly sculpture by the artist Taj Rust. It really showcases the way that artists are working today, both in terms of medium and themes. And then the Plaza program is just as dynamic. It's 13 new commissions that it starts on June 3rd and runs for a month. And just to pick out a couple, we open with this ceremonial work by Nia Witherspoon, which also includes augmented reality. It's exciting to see these mediums really entering artists' work. One that I'm particularly excited about, we're holding a service by Troy Anthony for Juneteenth that allows people to really challenge their grief into joy. And we're also turning our plaza into an Olympic arena by Anna Maria O'Gara Johannes. So that is another kind of huge transformation of the space. And this year we also have a couple of social practice projects, which is the first time we've brought that discipline into open call. Cindy Tran, she is making this kind of spoken word sonnet inspired by the stories of local business owners from all boroughs. And there's also going to be a series of workshops that center the concepts of Black interiority through play and through building with the artist lady Sasha Jones. So it is a great mix of work that you're going to experience both in the gallery and in the Plaza program.
That's exciting. And so Open Call is going on continuously over the year, over the rest of 2021. Is that correct?
Next, from June and July is our gallery program, and our Plaza program is in July. And then the main rest actually of the Open Call, the kind of other bulk of the program, will happen in our theatre in 2022. It was another kind of, it was a bit of a COVID decision in that we felt that we could, when you're planning this a year ago, we felt we knew we could realize an exhibition, and hopefully the plaza is semi outside. We have the doors open in Umar Court, but we were not sure about our theatre program, indoors capacity, etc. with COVID rules. So we put that program in 2022. So yes, it does span across the two years.
You had artists last year and now this year, so they become part of your family in a sense, right? And you will have a relationship that will continue into the future. Do you have any ideas of how to use this in your program going forward?
You described it perfectly in terms of family. They really do become part of our family, and we have worked with artists again. Last year, for example, we commissioned Keon Williams. They made a sculptural work performance piece in the exhibition. And then, when our doors closed to the public with COVID, we started producing an online digital series called Up Close. And several of our Open Call artists we returned to, and Keon they made this beautiful piece for that particular series. So we're constantly thinking about how we can weave these artists again into our program and remain within the family. And of course, we invite them to everything the Shed does. We'll be references for them. We'll send them things that we think would be of interest for them to apply to. And really, for me, it's so important to continue to support their careers as they grow and flourish.
Well, you mentioned in an interview that you believe that the best way to create opportunities for emerging artists is to belong to a community or to create a community. And I thought to myself, it's also what you are trying to do. The Shed is like this incredible thing that's been lowered into the Hudson Yards. So you have a very strategic role here to create that community for the Shed. And I guess that is why Open Call is so important to you.
Yeah, absolutely. I do encourage everyone, artists, to kind of build that community, because it's those other artists, those other curators that will support you, champion you, put you in shows, help you connect with other people, be a support network. And yes, at the Shed, we are constantly thinking about how we can be of and for New York, be for also our local community. And that really, there is no kind of silver bullet for that. I don't really prescribe to the kind of, if we build it, they will come, attitude. I think developing an intersectional audience takes a lot of intentionality, and it really weaves through everything we do at the organization, from curation to planning, ticketing. I often think about my colleague Dupay, who is our intersectional marketing strategist, and she's constantly even discussing how language matters, how images matter, how everything kind of has signals. And she works with very specific communities to bring audiences to the Shed, as well as our kind of free ticket access program. But free, and Open Call is free, isn't always the only way. And I have brilliant colleagues in my civic department, Tamira McCaw and Solana Chetman, who I create, they're kind of the other half of Open Call with the visual art department. And they often take programming outside the Shed walls and have commissioned, dance and poetry with, I think, over 20 schools. They recently commissioned a walking tour in the city that explored the July 1863 race riots. And so I think also leaving the building can do, and going to other communities can do just as much to build a community and an audience for within the building, within the Shed. And that's kind of an important part of what we do as well.
Do you think that the image of Hudson Yards, a little bit like the millionaire's paradise, will somehow maybe influence how people look at the Shed?
Yeah, of course. I think that, you can't decouple the Shed from the context that it's in. We are on city-owned land, so there is that kind of distinction. I think that the way that you can attract audiences, in just all the reasons I just said, it's to kind of embed that thinking into everything that you do, and be patient too as well. It's not always going to happen overnight, and it takes a lot of work and a lot of people and personal relationships and being out there and speaking to, not just kind of presuming anything. And that's, I think, the way that you can bring a community to any place.
Yeah. So it's not easy to do that, and I guess that is something that you have to earn, in the public mind over the years.
Absolutely. It takes that, and it takes, I have colleagues that a big part of their role and their job is to go to community boards, is to listen, is to hear about what is wanted, and then bring that back to the institution and help us embed that. For example, we can nest the Shed, we can roll the court kind of back. Our building is kind of crazy flexible, it's on wheels, and it rolls back and it creates this public plaza, which is super important to us and to our communities, to kind of create a space that is free and open and public and accessible during certain months. And that's something that we try and strive towards. But yes, it takes individuals, it takes it takes that kind of intentionality to really create those bridges. It is a journey that we are on at the Shed. But luckily I have incredible colleagues that work in that way.
artists in general are not really that great at self-promoting. I mean, there's often like a conflict between the artistic side and the business side of it. So do you provide any support for these artists once they've participated in the open call?
Yes, so we have been fiscal sponsors. We have written, multiple reference letters, suggested them for certain awards and such, like tried to really connect them to our colleagues in the field. It's been the slight challenge of doing this through COVID is that building of a community, that kind of network that comes from open call is a difficult thing to do virtually. Especially we had all these, like I said, 43 reviewers, 15 panelists, and in our first time around, we were all able to meet, make these introductions. The open call artists were able to meet. I think some of them even went on to form collaborations. It kind of just help that building of community, which, this year, everything being virtual, I am hopeful that, as things open up through the summer, we can sort of start to hold some of those more kind of convenings as well for our artists to meet each other and meet some of the supporters of the program.
So what can we expect through the summer and the fall?
Yeah, I mean, I would really encourage everyone to please come see Open Call, both in terms of this performance program and its visual exhibition. I think COVID protocols are lifting slightly. We will still obviously be stringent in some regard, but it's not quite as taxing as it was a few months ago. Mm-hmm. So that is a great relief for us going into Open Call. Maybe it'll be interesting to hear about some of the themes that actually run through Open Call, because the year that we've just had has obviously had an impact on artists, and there are these kind of specific themes that really run through. Just thinking about the gallery exhibition, we have artists that are, exploring, documenting local New York communities. Aisha Amin is one, where she's looking at historic Brooklyn Mosque and Muslim life in Brooklyn, or Ann Wu, who's made this incredible sculptural piece that explores architectural ornamentation in immigrant neighborhoods. And kind of another thread, I would say, is around memory and around dreams. There's this great piece by Pauline Shaw. She's created kind of this beautiful, large-scale felted tapestry, and it kind of looks abstract, but it's actually derived from the artists researching memory and MRI scans, which is kind of a brilliant thing about how you can really visualize that in abstract terms. Emily Brissot, she's blind, but she uses memory and imagination to create sculptures that reflect her kind of collaborative bond with her seeing iDog London. She's super interested in kind of interspecies relationships. And of course, loss and mourning plays an important part throughout all of the programs that we're doing. I'd say especially on the Plaza program, actually, where many of the pieces were conceived or shaped as rituals and services, places for human encounters. So I think the impact of the pandemic and the kind of hope of us all being together again has really inspired many artists. Yeah.
How does this thing with a retractable on wheels, the shed, how does that work? Does it function in reality?
It does function in reality. It is quite incredible. So the space, when it's deployed, we call it the court, and it's a performance space. You can black the place out. So we had our Bjork performance, Renee Fleming and such, and then it's on these wheels, and it's quite a simple system. I mean, listen, I'm not the technical person. It's probably hugely complicated. The whole building. It looks simple when you look at it, but the whole building gets like disconnected, and then it essentially rolls back. And from my understanding, it's the similar technology that is used to bring like shipping containers, when you like shipping. So it's on these wheels, and it kind of just set on these tracks, and it literally just rolls over the top of what we call the fixed building. Yeah. And then that creates this outside space. But you can also have it out, but with the doors up. And that's what we're doing for open call. So it's almost like a pavilion style space where people can wander in with the kind of these huge doors open to the elements. So it's very flexible in that regard. Yeah.
And, you know, in the summer now, you can have open-air concerts and stuff. It must be just magical there with the plaza and people wandering around.
Yeah, it's great. And, you know, open public space is super important. After we do open call, actually, we have to do the plaza program. We're nesting the shed, and we'll have an open plaza, and we're actually doing an augmented reality art exhibition. Called The Looking Glass. It's co-curated by myself and Daniel Birnbaum, who's now director of acute art, and lots of different, you know, it's Cause, Precious Okuyoma, Julie Curtis, Oliver Lyson, Thomas Saraceno, Darren Bader, like a huge, great list of artists. So our plaza in the summer will be also activated by invisible public art that you can see through your phone. Yeah.
That's incredible. So when is that?
That opens July 3rd.
Okay.
Yes.
Well, we have to put that on the calendar. What is your taste in art? What do you like personally?
I like interesting materials. So I'm always drawn to artists that kind of incorporate different types of materiality into their work, be it living matter, be it technology, you know, those be it kind of materials you wouldn't always necessarily expect to see. I think that for me, I'm very drawn, like art for me has to have these kind of two companions in a way. Like one, it has to speak to me like visually, aesthetically. It has to be something that, you know, perhaps I haven't seen before or feels like fresh or a new innovative format. But then also that the kind of real conceptual rigor has to be there. It's like, why is this being made? What's the story? Is it too introspective? Is it looking outwards? All of these questions kind of run through my head when I think that and look at art, and that kind of the dynamic of those two.
So, what is then good art? Is that something that really affects you emotionally, or do you use any other criteria for deciding what good art is?
I mean, I use several criteria. I would say that somehow like bad art affects me more when I see something or something really bad. I'm like, oh god, no. But yeah, I mean,
but you know that is really true because I have the same reaction. I have a very dear friend who's an artist, and I say, "Fucking, that was horrible." Well, that was good then. You know, yeah. It did something for you. Yeah, but I didn't like it. Well, but it's good.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. No. I also love art in unexpected. I mean, I loved working at Public Art Fund. I think it taught me so much about art because before I'd kind of always mainly worked inside gallery walls, and there's something very protective about the gallery space, you know, the white wall, the concrete. You can put an object in that space and it can have some kind of power. You take the object out of that space and it can lose all its power. And so I think working in public art can really like push you as a curator to think about what is those questions that you're asking, like what is special about art? What is special about an object? How can you have an object speak, you know, outside of itself to a variety, you know, to different audiences? So I think public art had kind of a huge impact in my learning and thinking in that way. But I have different criteria. You know, it's important that integrity is embedded into art practices. I think that is super, super important, as well as obviously kind of for me, something will stop me in my tracks when I haven't necessarily seen that before. Oh, yeah. It doesn't necessarily have to be a new medium. It can be kind of a new way of painting or a new way of imaging the body. But like, oh, you know, that you see so much that when something kind of like makes you step back, I think that's always always worth kind of researching, and that is very intuitive, and it's hard to put words to that sometimes.
Have you worked with Rosalie Goldberg at Performa?
I've never worked with her directly. I mean, I love their program. They do such great work, and I love that the festival kind of takes you to different parts of the city, and it is, in a sense, it is kind of a museum without walls. It has kind of the essence of public art within that institution as well, because they're working with these different architectures all over the city, and you can really make specific work for that architecture. Yeah, I mean, they're very friendly with the curators at Performa, and maybe one day we'll hope to collaborate. I do think that. I think you're right. There's a lot of synergy there between the two institutions.
It's a pretty bold and daring vision here. I mean, what you're setting out to do with the shed and your hopes and your aspirations, it's very easy to check out whether you actually are reaching those the goals or the vision and things like that, and I admire that. How do you feel about that challenge? I mean, that must be very inspiring and scary at the same time.
Yeah, I mean, nail on head there. Yeah, I mean, I think that for us, it's like we had to be complementary. There's so many great, incredible institutions in this city, both within visual art, performing. It is so rich that how can we be complementary to this kind of ecosystem that we were entering in, and we thought that the kind of ambition, the mission that we set out would achieve that. But yeah, I mean, there's a lot of risk. Commissioning work is full of risk because you literally do not know what you're getting until you get to the end, and you have to go on a journey, and sometimes this journey takes years. Actually, I started inviting some artists in 2017, and we're only realizing their projects, this year and next year. So, wow. It's a journey, and with that does come a lot of risk, but that's also where you can make change and the great reward that comes from that. So, yes, both incredibly exciting and also terrifying sometimes. Interesting, one of your questions you asked about the unique architecture. I was thinking about that because I was yes, on one hand, it is incredible to have this flexible space. I mean, it's pretty wild how flexible the space is. And it means that you can really start with a blank slate with artists, rather than kind of responding to an architecture. And I think that it does lend itself to the ways that artists are working today. But there's also a challenge, and because, right now, especially in my department, we're thinking about how we can build more sustainable practices actually within our exhibition making and our performances. And sometimes flexibility can be kind of antithetical to that, because you're changing everything every single time. It's not always, it's not a fixed architecture. It's not always the most kind of sustainable way to work. So we have been, have you read this book by Roman Krishnarik called The Good Ancestor? I would definitely check it out. It's kind of what's the subtitle? I have it over here on my bookshelf. It is a radical prescription for long-term thinking. And it essentially is a book about how we're all currently in this kind of modern Western state. We're very much short-term thinkers. And how do we think ahead? How do we think about, how do we be good ancestors? How do we think about our future, the future of humanity, and plan now for that future? And he has kind of a whole great list, uses, one of my favorites is the medieval idea of cathedral building, that you start something that isn't going to actually be used for many, many years to come, kind of outlives your own lifespan. So yeah, I've been reading this book and thinking about how some of that could also be embedded into exhibition making and curatorial practices. But that's something we talk a lot about in my department, is that we have this great gift with this great flexible building, but how do we also keep in mind that we need to be sustainable even within that framework?
Yeah. let's say, an opera house, you can do all these productions that you just unpack a production and you do it. But you are inventing the wheel every time.
Exactly.
I read here that you organized a retrospective on Agnes Denes.
I mean, Agnes, she turns 90 actually, I think next week. She's a prophet. I really got to know her work when I was at Public Art Fund because she created this very, very iconic piece where she planted a wheat field in downtown Manhattan, Battery Park. What is now Battery Park City. At the time, it was the landfill that was created when they built the Twin Towers. And she planted this wheat field there, like right next to Wall Street, thinking about that commodity that is traded there, thinking about, environmental concerns, connecting the countryside with the city. And it became this kind of sensation at the time. And still, with I would get emails maybe once a week, once every 2 weeks, asking about this project. And, really starting to dig into Agnes's work, that was just kind of the tip of the iceberg of the work that she'd been making. She has this incredible drawing practice, which spans from the 1960s, where, she tried to visualize all of kind of the complex ideas of humanity in visual form. So how do you visualize philosophy? How do you visualize language? How do you visualize mathematics? And then has a whole suite of kind of environmentally concerned projects, not only Wheatfield, but Tree Mountain for New York. She planted 11,000 trees in Finland, in this, in this great kind of tree, this forest, which is still standing. I had the pleasure of visiting it for the exhibition. And then has countless unrealized projects. And, I called her a prophet at the start of this conversation because she really was. I mean, reading through her ideas, she was talking about, solar paneled rooftops. She was talking about building gardens on roofs, like all these things like very early on, and suggesting all these different ways that we can help humanity in the future. So great artist, but also just a thinker, environmentalist, philosopher, those things as well. So for me, it was really important to do a retrospective with her. Also, because I think it just related so much to the Sheds program. She was working in all of these different ways and disciplines, and had all these incredible unrealized projects that we could work with her to commission. So
you also worked with Hilma of Klint. What is your fascination with Hilma?
I mean, how can you not be? I mean, it's like one of the most brilliant, fascinating stories. I curated that show again with Daniel Birnbaum, who at the time was the director of the Moderna Museum and now sits on the foundation of the Hilma of Klint board, sits on the board of the foundation, I should say. She was making these large-scale, one would say abstract, others say they're not abstract. They're complete representations of kind of unseen realities, unseen worlds. It's connected to the scientific revolution. It's thinking about how suddenly things that we could never see before were being visualized. Very embedded in its time, but also has this kind of incredible story where she didn't know if she could share her work publicly. At that time, who she was, being a woman, making that kind of work, it was almost too radical for her moment, and had this kind of great belief that she knew one day it would be understood, but she just had to wait. It's that long-term thinking that Roman writes about in The Good Ancestor. She knew like her time wasn't for her in that moment, and had to wait for a future audience to receive her work.
Yeah.
So, I mean, lots of crazy things happened when we were installing that show. That in her paintings, she has these two swans, like a white swan and a black swan. And we'd never seen, this is in the Serpentine, which is in Hyde Park, and there's the lake, and we'd never seen a black swan. And as soon as these crates arrived, suddenly joining the white swans that we had seen many times, there was this one black swan that was there. I was like, it was all very... This is what Hilma does to you. You start building these like narratives and trying to kind of connect to her outside of yourself. But yeah, I mean, it's such a powerful story, and my goodness, amazing art. What a colorist!
Yeah.
She's just an incredible colorist. Yeah.
I saw the exhibition at Guggenheim, and those big paintings at the ground level, right? They were just, they took your breath away.
Yeah, the 10 largest. They kind of follow, there's childhood, adolescence. They follow kind of a trajectory, a linear path of growth from young to old. Yeah, those paintings are incredible.
Yeah. So you think her art has some kind of a supersonic power embedded in them?
I really do. I haven't spent so much time with them. I do think that paintings can kind of hold more and hold the past and hold energies within them. Absolutely. And hers is definitely do that.
Well, that's the fascination with art, really. I mean, you go through a gallery, you feel nothing, and all of a sudden you see something, and boom, you're lost and you're caught. You know, you're just done.
I just had that with the new David Hammond's installation with the Whitney, the public art project that's just opened, and it is such a simple idea and piece, but it hit me so hard because it's essentially like I don't know if you've seen it, but it's an outline of a pier that used to be there, which was the Gordon Matta Clark pier, where he made the cut piece at the end of the pier right by the Whitney. And it's just represented, you know, the pier is long gone, but it's just represented by this kind of very thin piping. And it suddenly struck me to think about, just imagine if we could, through the world, like build almost in outline the history of what stood there before and connect us to that history and to the architectures that once stood there, and therefore the people that once stood there. And it all like hit me in one go, and I just thought it's such a brilliant, simple piece. So hats off to the Whitney and to David Hammond on that project.
I'm really looking forward to stop by and check it out. I have to say, now that I've read so much about you and the shed and what you're trying to accomplish, I would love to support you in this daring adventure.
That would be wonderful. Please do. And let me know if you come by.
I would love to. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
This is Art Insiders New York, and my name is Anders Holst. If you enjoyed this episode and have family and friends who love New York and are passionate about the world of art, design, and architecture in the city, please spread the word by following us on artinsidersnewyork.com or liking us on our Facebook page, Art Insiders New York, where we publish newsworthy material all the time. It's very much appreciated. Thank you. This episode was produced by UOM LLC, copyright 2021.